Let's take a look at the structures in your word list for embryology. Here you can see the model that we have to go through some of these structures of embryology. This same model labeled is part of a set of PowerPoint slides that are in your urinary reproductive folder for your final practical. First structure on the word list to identify is a blastomere. So blastomere is going to be a cell that has come about or has been developed from the zygote, and the zygote is the fertilized egg cell. So the egg cell after it's been fertilized by the sperm cell, and that single cell is called the zygote, and that single cell is going to repeatedly divide, and it's going to form two separate cells initially. So we see the fertilized zygote here. After this cell divides, we have two separate cells of the same size, and each one is called a blastomere. These two cells will then divide and give rise to 4 cells. So here we have 4 blastomeres. Those 4 cells will divide and give rise to 8 cells, 16 cells, 32 cells, etc., creating a mass of cells that will eventually become the embryo and then the fetus. Once these blastomeres reach the level of 16 cells, we see this round ball-shaped cell mass, and we call this a morula. So the morula is the second term on your word list. That morula is a solid cell mass. Eventually it will continue to develop, and that solid cell mass will give rise to this structure here, which is, we can see kind of a solid mass of cells at one side of this structure. The wall of the structure is made of cells as well, but inside we see a chamber, a fluid-filled chamber called a blastocyst cavity. The whole structure is called a blastocyst. So here we have a blastocyst in which we have what's known as an inner cell mass and a large blastocyst cavity. Before we move down and look at the embryo, I just want to point out here that this is a sperm cell on this embryology model. As we come down here and we see different stages of development of this mass of cells, eventually forming an embryo and then a fetus, let's identify the embryo. So here, these would be illustrated as embryos on this embryology board. This one would as well, because I think if we look closely enough at this one, this is 6 weeks of development. So we're going to call the developing collection of cells up to the 8th week, we're going to call it an embryo, and then after that it becomes what's known as a fetus. So this level here is at 8 weeks of development. So from here moving forward, we would refer to the structure as a fetus. The amnion and the chorion. So if we take a look at the structure down here, so this is the chorion, and this membrane directly around the embryo is the amnion. As we come here, this is a little further along in development. We see this pink layer being the chorion and the purple layer being the amnion. I already pointed out the zygote. So the zygote is the single fertilized egg cell or ovum that has been fertilized by the sperm cell and has become one unique cell containing 46 chromosomes, and we see the zygote here in different stages of its initial division. The umbilical cord. So we see the umbilical cord here. We see the umbilical cord here. This is a model of the placenta, and we see the umbilical cord there as well. Somites. So to see somites, we have to kind of move back a little further in development to the early stages of the embryo. Here we see somites kind of just outside the neural tube. Here we see somites. Here we see somites. So somites are, we find these at vertebral levels. They will eventually develop into the vertebrae, the ribs, skin, and some musculature of the trunk and the upper body. The placenta I've pointed out already, so here we see the placenta. Here we see the placenta. And then finally the yolk sac we see here.